The unwashed man in the worn hoodie dropped to his knees on the polished marble floor of the luxury hotel lobby, stretching his dirt-streaked hand forward toward the executive crouched before him. Between them hung a thick stack of $100 bills wrapped in a pale rubber band, exactly $40,000 in cash. Guests across the lobby froze. The hotel receptionist stood paralyzed behind the desk, her hand clasped tightly over her mouth in sheer shock. In a world where money buys power, silence, and second chances, the poorest man in the room had just handed back a fortune to a man who had everything to lose. If you believe that true character is revealed when no one is looking, that honesty is worth more than gold, and that a single act of integrity can alter the course of human lives, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment below, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful journeys that remind us what truly matters. His name was Richard Vance. At 48 years old, Richard was the chief operations executive for a premier commercial real estate development corporation. He was a man whose entire life was governed by precision, schedules, and strict bottom lines. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, sharp necktie, and an expensive leather-banded watch, Richard walked through the world with the calm authority of someone used to controlling his environment. But behind the sharp suits and flawless public reputation lay a man living on borrowed time and immense private pressure. That rainy Tuesday afternoon, Richard had arrived at the Grandview Hotel for the most critical transaction of his career. The corporation was acquiring a sprawling waterfront plot for a flagship urban restoration project. Due to last-minute legal delays and strict seller requirements regarding immediate escrow verification, Richard was carrying $40,000 in physical cash, withdrawn directly from the corporate reserve account to finalize the initial binding earnest deposit in the hotel's private conference suite. The money was contained in a heavy, unmarked manila envelope tucked into his leather document folder. Losing that money would not only ruin the merger, it would instantly destroy his professional credibility, trigger an internal fraud investigation, and terminate his 30-year career. As Richard stepped through the heavy revolving glass doors of the Grandview Hotel, his cell phone rang incessantly in his pocket. It was his lead legal counsel demanding immediate confirmation regarding the signing. Distracted, stressed, and balancing his phone, an umbrella, and his document folder, Richard hurried toward the grand marble staircase. What he did not notice was that the slick leather folder had unlatched during his brisk walk. As he pulled his phone out, the thick manila envelope slipped free, hitting the plush carpet near the entrance before sliding into the shadowed corner near the bellhop stand. Richard kept walking, completely unaware that his life's work was lying unattended on the floor behind him. Sitting near the entrance heating vent was 52-year-old Daniel Mercer. To the hotel security and passing guests, Daniel was simply an invisible figure wrapped in a threadbare, faded hoodie, leaning heavily against a weathered canvas backpack. But Daniel was not a ghost. He was a man who had lived a full, dignified life before tragedy tore it apart. 10 years earlier, Daniel had owned a small, prosperous carpentry workshop in town. He was a master woodworker who built custom dining tables, bookshelves, and doors, pieces built to endure generations. He was a devoted husband to his wife, Sarah, and a loving father to their teenage daughter, Clara. Everything collapsed in the winter of 2018. A catastrophic fire ignited in the industrial complex housing his workshop. The building was destroyed overnight. Deprived of his livelihood and facing mounting uninsured liabilities, Daniel spent every cent of his savings trying to keep his family afloat. 18 months later, Sarah succumbed to a rapid, aggressive illness. The medical debt swallowed what remained of his home. Broken-hearted, exhausted, and unable to secure steady employment in the aftermath of his loss, Daniel eventually found himself living on the periphery of society. He spent his days sitting quietly near public spaces, observing the hurried lives of people who looked through him as if he were made of glass. Despite his extreme poverty, Daniel maintained a fierce, uncompromising inner moral compass. He refused to beg aggressively. He never stole. He took odd jobs cleaning alleyways or stacking crates for local grocers whenever his health allowed. He believed, as his father had taught him, that a man's dignity is the one thing no circumstance can take away unless he gives it up voluntarily. On that rainy afternoon, Daniel had stepped into the outer foyer of the Grandview Hotel simply to escape the freezing rain for a few brief minutes. He sat quietly, adjusting his heavy backpack, when he saw the well-dressed executive stride past. Daniel watched the thick manila envelope slide out from the executive's folder and drop silently onto the runner rug. He called out immediately, "Sir, excuse me, sir." But the heavy rain outside and the bustling noise of the lobby drowned out his raspy voice. Richard vanished around the corner toward the main reception counter. Daniel pushed himself up from the wall. He walked over and picked up the envelope. The flap was unsealed. Inside, resting beneath a simple bank band, were thick stacks of crisp $100 bills. Daniel's breath hitched. He had not held a $100 bill in nearly 6 years. The sum inside was enough to change his life instantly. It meant a warm apartment for years, hot food, new clothes, medical care, and the chance to buy a modest set of carpentry tools to rebuild his trade. Nobody had seen the envelope fall. Nobody was watching him. He could walk out the revolving door right back into the rain, and his nightmare of poverty would be over. Daniel stood in the grand entrance hall for 10 long seconds, staring down at the fortune in his calloused, dirt-stained hands. His heart hammered against his ribs. He thought of his late wife, Sarah, and her gentle voice reminding him that an easy path built on another's loss leads only to a ruined soul. Daniel closed the manila envelope firmly. He gripped the cash tight in his right hand, secured his worn backpack over his shoulders, and walked straight toward the bustling hotel lobby. Meanwhile, at the front reception desk, Richard was opening his folder to present his corporate identification to the hotel manager. As he reached into the side pocket for the manila envelope, his hands met empty air. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his chest. He dumped the contents of his briefcase onto the counter, blueprints, contracts, personal notepads, but the envelope was gone. His face drained of color. His heart pounded wildly against his ribs as he turned around, wildly scanning the vast, crowded room. $40,000 had vanished. His corporate career was over. His mind raced into total darkness. Suddenly, a voice echoed across the quiet marble room. "Sir, you dropped this." Richard turned. Moving briskly through the grand lobby was Daniel. Security guards near the door immediately moved to intercept the disheveled man, assuming he was causing a disturbance. But Daniel maneuvered past them, focused entirely on the executive. As he reached Richard near the front desk, Daniel did not demand a reward or make a scene. Recognizing the sheer scale of the panic on the businessman's face, Daniel dropped down onto one knee on the cold marble floor, an instinctive gesture to stabilize his tired legs and present the money directly up to its owner. Richard fell to a crouch beside him, his eyes wide in absolute astonishment. Between them, held in Daniel's cracked, weathered fingers, was the thick bundle of bills, the yellow rubber band holding the $40,000 completely intact. Behind the counter, the young receptionist gasped, bringing both hands up to her face in utter shock. Several wealthy patrons stopped dead in their tracks, staring at the dramatic scene unfolding on the lobby floor. A homeless man, dressed in rags, was kneeling before a corporate executive, handing back a fortune that could have bought him a new life. Richard took the money with trembling hands. Is all of it here?" he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. Daniel looked directly into Richard's eyes, his expression calm, proud, and completely devoid of deceit. "Every single dollar, sir. It fell out near the front entrance. I tried to call you, but you were moving too fast." Richard sat back on his heels, completely stunned. For 30 years in the cutthroat corporate world, Richard had operated on the principle that every human interaction was transactional, that every person had a price, and that self-interest governed all human behavior. Yet here, kneeling on the floor before him, was a man who possessed nothing, who had every reason to take the money, returning $40,000 without hesitation. "Why didn't you keep it?" Richard asked, the question escaping his lips before he could stop it. "No one saw you pick it up. You could have walked away." Daniel stood up slowly, wiping his damp hands on his worn jeans. He looked around the pristine hotel lobby, then back at Richard. "Because it wasn't mine," Daniel said simply. I've lost my business, my home, and my wife, sir, but I haven't lost who I am. If I took what belonged to you, I'd have lost the last thing I have left, my self-respect." The words hung in the air, heavy and profound. The surrounding crowd remained dead silent. The hotel manager, who had stepped out to call security, stood frozen near the office door. Richard stood up slowly. He looked at the money in his hand, then at the man standing before him. He saw the frayed cuffs of Daniel's hoodie, the worn-out soles of his shoes, and the deep lines of hardship etched into his face. Yet behind those tired eyes was a strength and dignity that money could never buy. Richard extended his hand. "My name is Richard Vance," he said, his voice steady and filled with deep reverence. Daniel took his hand, his grip firm despite his weathered skin. "Daniel Mercer." Richard took $100 bills from the stack and offered them to Daniel as an immediate token of gratitude. "Please, take this. You saved my life today. This is the least I can do." Daniel looked at the $1,000, then gently pushed Richard's hand back. "I didn't give it back for a reward, Mr. Vance. I gave it back because it was the right thing to do. Keep your money." Richard was moved to the core. He realized that offering cash to a man of Daniel's character was an inadequate gesture. Daniel didn't just need a temporary handout. He deserved the opportunity to live with the dignity his character demanded. Richard turned to the hotel manager. "Book Mr. Mercer the finest suite in this hotel for the next 2 weeks. Put everything on my personal account, room service, clothes, whatever he needs." He then turned back to Daniel. "And tomorrow morning, Daniel, I am having my driver pick you up. I want to talk to you about a project." What Richard did not mention right away was that his real estate company had recently acquired a historical timber building in the city center, intending to restore its original custom woodwork and transform it into a community arts center. The project had been stalled for months because Richard could not find a master craftsman who understood traditional wood restoration and cared enough about the craft to lead the effort with absolute integrity. The next morning, after a hot shower, new clothes, and a hot meal, Daniel was driven to Richard's corporate headquarters. Sitting in the sunlit executive office, Richard laid out the blueprints for the historical restoration project. He offered Daniel the role of lead restoration master, with a competitive salary, private workshop facilities, and full authority to hire and train a team of apprentice woodworkers from local community shelters. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as he looked at the blueprints. For 6 years, he had believed his trade was dead, his life reduced to surviving on the margins. Now, sitting across from a man whose life he had saved through a simple act of honesty, he was being handed the keys to his own redemption. "I don't know what to say, Mr. Vance," Daniel choked out. "You don't have to say anything, Daniel," Richard replied warmly. "You reminded me yesterday of something I had forgotten in my pursuit of success. Wealth isn't defined by what we accumulate in our bank accounts. It's defined by what we refuse to compromise when everything is on the line." Over the following 2 years, the historical timber building was transformed into one of the most celebrated architectural landmarks in the state. Under Daniel's meticulous leadership, the project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. But more than the building itself, the workshop became a haven of second chances. Daniel hired dozens of individuals who had fallen on hard times, teaching them the art of woodworking and instilling in them the same unwavering sense of pride and integrity that had carried him through his darkest days. Richard and Daniel remained close friends. Every Tuesday afternoon, regardless of their busy schedules, the corporate executive and the master craftsman met for lunch at the Grandview Hotel, sitting near the very lobby entrance where their paths had first crossed. Before this story comes to an end, we would love to hear from you. If you were in Daniel's position, cold, hungry, and facing an envelope of untraceable cash, would you have had the courage to do what he did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might give someone else the strength to choose honesty today. As the afternoon sun streamed through the high glass windows of the hotel lobby, illuminating the polished marble floor where a disheveled man had once knelt before a desperate executive, Richard looked across the table at his friend. He realized that the greatest asset his company had ever acquired wasn't a piece of real estate or a multi-million-dollar contract. It was the simple, undeniable truth that a quiet voice of integrity can pierce through the noise of the world, and that when we choose honor over greed, we open the door to miracles we never could have built on our own. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember, never underestimate the power of an honest heart, because sometimes the poorest person in the room is the one who holds the greatest wealth of all.